strength. So we're just seeing rand weakness not only in our market but across the markets. What happens is a bit of a risk-off scenario when investors choose to move out of equity markets, as you've seen with Asia and also the US markets overnight, and that just pushes safe haven buying in the US dollar, thus affecting our rand.
All right, so one would assume then that it's the international factor. We also had some analysts saying that, it's lost its steam from that constitutional court judgment last week. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I definitely agree. As scenarios unfold, we're still very topical regarding the announcements last week. I think the biggest scenario that everybody's waiting for is if there's going to be a downgrade. We also had PMI sector manufacturing numbers coming out in the private sector, which did also decline to one of its lowest levels, also putting further pressure on the economy and on the rand. Mm-hmm. So there's many factors affecting the rand, very much influential on international markets for now. But I do think as we start to digest more about the court rulings around Zuma and the political uncertainty, then the rand will come topical around those scenarios.
Travis, you mentioned those PMI numbers. I mean, that essentially is a look at activity in the private sector. It's pointing to, a declining activity in new orders and output, both down for March. This is some of its lowest levels in 2 years here, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a big concern for the business. So just a key indicator of where South African growth is, a key indicator for what if we can pull out of these terrible levels of unemployment that we're seeing at the moment. But if you had to look at the global field, we've seen PMI manufacturing numbers from governmental levels looking very, very weak across Germany, across France. We did see uptick in the Chinese numbers. I bet the Chinese numbers are very much influenced on the holiday that they've had recently. So a lot of guys digesting these PMI numbers locally in our private sector, which doesn't bode well for the future. But also if you look at it globally, there's been a vast number of PMIs coming out across different economies.
Yeah, depressing sentiment from those PMI numbers, but at the same time you have Ford announcing today that it's got a 2.6 billion rand expansion investment. That's certainly good news for jobs, isn't it?
Yeah, very, very pleasing news. Ford is no stranger to South Africa. It operates out of South Africa into 148 different countries. It's got a very big plant in Pretoria, and in 2014 it said it was looking at maximizing the expansion around that plant and looking at alternatives in Angola and Nigeria as well. I think that due to regulatory pressures around Nigeria and companies like MTN and Tiger Brands and the likes, I think Ford has made a right decision and looking at South Africa. It has always had a concern with labor disputes within South Africa economy, and that's why it was looking at West Africa business. But this is really, really good for our economy, and if they can continue to build on their Pretoria plant and their PE business, I think it will really, really create good employment across Pretoria and also the Eastern Cape and PE.
All right, let's shift focus now to the other big news of this week, the Panama Files. Now, it's basically a huge leak of confidential documents, and it's revealing how the rich and powerful are using tax havens to hide their wealth. But over the past 48 hours, Travis, we've seen several banks, companies and bodies, certainly here in South Africa as well, saying they will, expand their web and investigate. What do you make of these files, and how significant is it to this country?
For now, I think it's very, very small. It's the tip of the iceberg. We're looking at political figures. We're looking at within the UK and locally and around the world being called up to ask questions. And as you said, companies are also being asked lots of questions. Impala was one of those companies that was mentioned within its subsidiary company Zimplat, saying that they were paying wages through this so-called tax haven venture. I think it's still early days. If you look at Impala, the biggest news on there today affecting their prices, more Royal Buffalo King looking at selling some of its assets within the company. So it hasn't really made the big moves on the headlines as I expected, but I think it's still early days, and as we start digesting the numerous reports coming from that, I think we'll start seeing more impact on maybe our local market as well as definitely international market.
Travis from the JSE, thanks very much indeed for talking to us. All right, we'll take a look at more news coming up after the break. Do stay with us.
In our next segment, we explore exciting cultural festivities in India.
The 10-day festival witnessed a large congregation of women at a temple. As per the annual ritual, women cook an offering of a sweet dish.
And the health department all are giving the warmful supports for the Pongala.
Magazine Vogue celebrated its centenary by bringing enthusiasts and supporters from far and wide.
An exhibition of fashion, beauty and portrait prints.
We wanted to show our original vintage photographs. We didn't really want to do, modern prints.
Children's rights in health are a priority in the journey of good health.
All children should have access to adequate health care, not only curative but preventative as well.
How to identify ADHD on children.
ADHD is a childhood disorder which manifests with the symptoms of hyperactivity, impulsivity, and or inattention.
Is breastfeeding still a vital nutrition to babies even today?
Breastfeeding for the first 6 months of life is absolutely crucial.
Catch Health Talk with Dr. Sello Mutawung every Saturday from 9 till 10 a.m.
The deepening hunger crisis in Malawi is threatening the survival of children.
And also it is the life-threatening part of malnutrition.
Malawi is facing its worst food crisis in 9 years.
Mugabe is the world's oldest sitting head of state, ahead of Queen Elizabeth of Britain.
The veteran leader seeks to temporarily forget his party's problems and instead focus on his legacy.
But he shows no sign of slowing down or stepping down from power after 36 years in office.
Welcome back. South Africa's auto manufacturing sector continues to draw investment. Ford has become the latest company announcing a major investment into the sector. It is to invest R2.5 billion to expand its factory in Pretoria, a move that will create about an estimated 1,200 jobs. The factory will manufacture a new model that will be exported elsewhere on the continent. Ford regional head Jim Farley says the move reinforces South Africa's position as a strategic export base for Ford. Reports say that the new model that will be manufactured here is the SUV Ford Everest. It is reported that Ford's Pretoria plant will be able to build 10,000 Ford Everests a year, making it the fourth production hub for the SUV after factories in Thailand, India and China. Ford plans to start production on the vehicle in the third quarter of this year. Well, the Association of Mine Workers and Construction Union, AMCU, says it will challenge Sibanye Gold's urgent court interdict opposing a strike that is to begin tomorrow. AMCU members voted in October to strike in the gold sector, including at Sibanye, but had agreed not to down tools immediately. Spokesperson Manzini Zungu confirmed to the SABC that the union is challenging the company's application. AMCU had given a 48-hour strike notice to Sibanye. If the AMCU union is successful in challenging the gold miners' urgent interdict, it means that there will be an indefinite strike as of tomorrow. The AMCU spokesperson says the union aimed to get the salaries paid to its members in the gold sector to match those wages in the coal and platinum sector. Sibanye signed an agreement with the three smaller unions and extended a wage deal to the AMCU members. AMCU led a bruising 5-month wage strike in the platinum sector, demanding more than a doubling of wages in 2014, the wage, or the minimum wage, therefore rising to 12,500 rand. The same demand is sought in gold. South African private sector firms have reported a substantial decline in activity in March. The Standard Bank Market PMI shows new orders and output falling sharply. companies scaled back their input buying and staff hiring activities. The reduction in workforce numbers is the most marked in the survey's history. Input costs continued to rise during March, with unfavorable exchange rates continuing to exert upward pressure on inflation. So the headline PMI numbers fell from February's 49.1 to 47 in March. It rounds off the worst quarter on record. Retailers say they've seen a notable decline in business activity in the first quarter of this year.